All right, so today is going to be a little bit all over the place, just because I'm going to talk about sort of several things that are on my mind, projects that I'm working on, that Babbel's working on, a little bit of the news. So let me first um, talk about the first thing that's on my mind is large language models. It's not really the first thing on my mind. It just seems to be the first thing on everybody's mind. Um, and by large language models, I'm obviously talking about things like ChatGPT and Bard, and it seems to be all over the place. So the few things that I saw that um, make that I kind of want to talk about is that there was this horrible incident with somebody actually. Well, I don't even know if I want to say it. Trigger warning. That I'm going to somebody basically ended their life after having a conversation with a chatbot in Belgium. It was not ChatGPT; it was a different chatbot. And of course, I'm not going to blame this on the chatbot. I don't think anybody would say that this is solely the fault of someone interacting with a chatbot or a large language model. But it does highlight the fact that these things are out in the world. They have consequences, which we have to consider. And, everybody's been talking about, the impact on work and the future of work, biases that these large language models have embedded in them, lots of safety issues, the fact that they hallucinate, they get things wrong. But of course, a lot of people are talking about the immense power that these systems have. So so it's one of those things you can't avoid. And so part of me feels like I've been trying not to engage too much with the conversation because I feel like I don't want to add noise to this entire thing, because there's so much noise out there with people talking about the large language models and the potential downsides, the potential upsides, or the power that they have. And at this point, I'm realizing that I'm going to have to engage more with this. And, we've been working at Babbel on auditing natural language processing systems for a long time. This was one of the first projects that we got into when we first started thinking about how are we going to audit an algorithm. In fact, the first algorithm we ever audited, quote unquote audited, because it wasn't actually like a compliance audit or anything like that. It was just an assessment of an algorithm, a natural language processing algorithm. It was the very first one we did was a sentiment analysis system. And so we've been into this, or interested in this, for a very long time. And so my approach to the whole issue is very practical. Like I really view this as no different in kind, anyway, no different to any other algorithmic system which you need to do a risk assessment for. And so looking at the positives, looking at the negatives, understanding what the risk is. It's very contextual. It's very use case specific. And so in my mind, I'm busy thinking about these just in that context. But I think I'm going to have to engage more with it. And I think that one initiative that I'm planning on getting off the ground at the Algorithmic Bias Lab is for us to shift some of our focus a little bit more to auditing these large language models, and doing risk assessments specifically for large language models, and trying to understand how we can get ahead of the curve a little bit on identifying potential risks. And when you have an incident like things like people interacting with these chatbots that need social services, and that doesn't get flagged, that's a problem that we need to figure out. I mean, that's a societal problem, but we also need to figure out a socio-technical solution to this, because You know, they're interfacing with AI, and that's in our purview, in our meaning, BABL and the Algorithm Bias Lab. And so we're thinking about this a lot more now, and we're trying to really tackle this issue. And I think the issue in general of controlling the outputs of large language models, I mean, it's clearly a big research interest for companies, because they want to take these models and they want to have specific purpose-built models for their use case. But I think that that's something that auditors we have to be ahead of the curve on this. And so in any case, I just wanted to talk about that, or mention that briefly. And the other thing where that's coming up is this recent letter. So I don't know if people have seen this, and if you have thoughts about that, let me see if I can find a copy of this. Yeah. So let me share my screen real quick. I'll just for those who may not have seen this. So this is the open letter that the Future of Life Institute calling basically on AI labs to immediately pause for 6 months the training of AI systems more powerful than GPT-4. And if you read through this, so for those of you who've seen this, and I think everybody has, you can add your name to the list. I have not added my name to the list, and there's a lot of famous people who have added their names to this list. If you read through it, there's, you know, what they say is all very sensible, I think, but I have several problems with it. So let me just comment real quickly. I don't want to be too much of a pundit here. I think in general, the spirit of what this is trying to do, I totally support. I think things are moving too fast. The whole reason I'm in this business is to protect humans from possible negative effects of AI. That's the BABL's mission statement. We want to promote human flourishing in the age of AI. And I think one thing that is obvious is that things are moving so fast right now with AI, and in particular, it's driven by these large language models and generative AI in the image space and deep fakes. And to some extent, people have forgotten about things like facial recognition and biometrics and things like this. Those are still around, and lots of the privacy issues and fundamental rights issues associated with all sorts of other kinds of AI. So let's not forget that that's still there. But clearly, this powerful technology is scaring a lot of people, and I think we do need to get regulation in place very quickly to start having a more systematic way of dealing with these powerful technologies. The problem that I have with this particular letter is that I feel like it feeds in a little bit to a lot of the hype that's been happening. So they talk a lot about powerful systems. Yeah, that anthropomorphize it in some sense, these models. And I feel like it's a little bit, I'm going to stop sharing. I feel like it's a little bit feeding into this hype. I don't think 6 months, a 6-month ban is going to actually do anything. I don't think they think that either. I don't think they think anybody will do it. It's clearly being done for expressive power of, you know, standing up for what they think is sort of reckless use of these technologies. But I think in reality, nobody's going to stop doing this for 6 months. And what they call for in the letter is, if you should publicly declare that you stop, and if not, government should step in. And I think that so for one thing, people aren't going to stop if governments are not going to step in. If governments were going to step in, that would mean that they would be taking some extraordinary action in order to do something. And in my opinion, if governments were going to take extraordinary action to do something, then there's a whole lot of other things that they could be doing than enforcing these people to stop. So, for instance, a lot of the things that they mentioned in this letter later on, they could implement immediately without having to worry about this ban. So things like transparency requirements, forcing these labs to allow the government to go in and actually take a look at what they've got, protecting intellectual property and all of that, independent audits, getting a registry, keeping track of how much compute people are using for these models. And so there's a lot of things that could be done. And so anyway, I just wanted to comment on that because a lot of people have asked me about it and asked if I was going to sign it. I'm not going to sign it. I do think things should slow down. And I think we need to move faster. Governments need to move a lot faster. That's obvious. We can't be waiting around for the perfect regulations. And so I think we need to be passing laws which are imperfect and not comprehensive. We just need to get in there and understand what's going on. And I think if I were to default, if a policymaker asked me, and sometimes they do, but if a policymaker asked me what I think is the lowest hanging fruit priority for passing a law, it's transparency. Like, make people give, at least to the government, if not publicly transparent, information about their AI systems if they're going to be in high-risk areas, period. And there are a lot of areas which are high risk, and even apparently chatbots are becoming high risk because they're being used, in lieu of talking to social services and things like this. So I think transparency is a really easy thing. Just say, if you're using an AI system in a high-risk area, you need to produce a transparency statement. This is akin to what the ICO has advocated for in the UK. Transparency statement simply outlines exactly how your system works. What's its inputs? What are its outputs? How did you train it? How does it work, and how does it work in the context in which you're using it? So what's that more sort of socio-technical aspect of it, including data flow diagrams and things like that? That should be produced for all systems that are operating in a high-risk area, and that should be available to any regulator and potentially available to the public, although that's probably more contentious claim. But that should be at least available to any regulator that wants it. That's pretty low-hanging fruit, and in any case, that's sort of step number one, I think. Let me pause for a second, take a look at some questions, because I think a few have come in now. Okay, I got a question about, in the context of AI auditing. Let me see, make sure I go in order here. Yeah. In the context of AI auditing, what is your understanding of the word socio-technical as a concept? Okay, that's good. Thank you for asking that, Alex. This is, I use this word a lot, and a lot of people use it. And in my context, in AI auditing, or in responsible AI in general, socio-technical to me is the technical system plus the everything around it that is required for that technical system to function according to its purpose. And so what I mean by that, it has to be contextually based. And so what I mean is, it's not just a recommender system, let's say. It's the recommender system, how it's integrated into, including user interface, integrated into the entire platform, how it's moderated, including who's moderating it, how the users see it, what control the user has over it, and also understanding how the user understands those outputs, whether they know that that's there or not, whether they know there's a recommender system working in the background? How much do the moderators know? And so for me, socio-technical is the entire context that includes a lot of human understanding and human interaction. And so when we do an assessment, for instance, a risk assessment or an impact assessment, or when we're looking at somebody else having done one, what we mean by socio-technical there is they would have need to have talked to people. And so they have some evidence. So it's not just that a recruiter will use this tool to, you know, inform their decision about who's going to be the best candidate. They would have actually had to have gone and talked to recruiters and got an understanding of what do you think that number means that's next to that person's name, or how far down a list do you go when you are ranking candidates? You know, do you scroll all the way down to the page? Do you go to page 5 if there are multiple pages? Is that the only number you consider? Are there other numbers that you factor in? How important is it? So a real socio-technical assessment has a lot of that sort of human understanding in it. Anyway, that's probably longer answer than you were looking for, but to me, and we have something called a CETA framework that we work, which is context, inputs, decision, procedure, and then actions that are taken from that we kind of use to get the socio-technical context. Okay, next question is, what do you say to the memorandum? Oh yes, okay, so that I think I answered that question about the memorandum on AI developments. Yeah, so I think in theory it's okay. Like I like the spirit of it. I just don't think it's reason. Nobody's going to stop for 6 months, and I think regulators need to move fast. I think we need to have something done very soon, because AI is developing so fast, and things like chat or GPT-4 are powerful enough that we're going to see a lot of innovation happening very quickly. And we're already seeing it getting plugged into many different other services. And so, and it's happening, nobody's thinking about risk. I mean, I wouldn't say nobody, but clearly, given how fast these things are being put out, people aren't taking the kind of time that they need to actually figure out what are the potential risks. Like, to my answer about the socio-technical system, when someone does a risk assessment, if they want to actually understand that socio-technical system and the risks associated with that, you know, that you can't get that done in a week, which is what's, you know, some of these things really have been the, you know, rapidly adopted this large language model technology into some random service, and there's no way they have gotten the kind of done the kind of analysis that's needed to even skim the surface of what the risk is. And so I think there has to be they have to do something. So next one. Oh, thanks, Naz, for the link for reading more. So someone, anonymous person, said, would you not say that socio-technical is the symbiosis between the technical and the human? So we're taking a 360-degree perspective on all the tools, inputs, outputs of both the two, and then the middle ground and on the edge. Yeah, absolutely. I think it is. Yeah, it's everything in context, including the technical and the person, and being able to understand the context in which ultimately consequential decisions are made. I think in the end of the day, these tools are going to result in some action in the world. The action in the world could be like something very abstract, like how a person feels when they interact with it, right? Or it could be much more direct, like someone either gets hired or doesn't, someone gets social services or they don't. And understanding how ultimately that effect on the outside world happens and is mediated by both the algorithm and people. And it's not an easy thing to do. It's not like impossible to do. It's just it does take work and takes careful thinking. Another comment is, would you say the letter is about power posturing? Yeah, I mean, yeah, it's a lot about power. I mean, unfortunately, a lot of these issues are power is very central to it, and I think, I mean, if you look at the people who signed it, like, yeah, I don't know. I don't think I'll be honest, I don't think the concerns of vulnerable peoples are really centered in this effort. I think it is a lot about people thinking like, oh, whoa, slow down, you're going too fast. But more so from the power's perspective, like I might be falling behind, or yeah, just worried about really, I wouldn't say silly things, but worrying about things that are not quite immediately a problem, which is like sort of existential risk or AI safety. Those things are issues, but they're not like issues that are going to explode in 6 months that uh we have to worry about that right now. We do have to start worrying about it right now, but it's not the main issue. The main issue is that horrible things could potentially happen to people who are not in power, and I think that wasn't what that letter was really about. I think they hinted at some of those things, but it's not really centering the concerns of people who don't have power and are getting affected by these systems. And so in that sense, it's not coming, I think, exactly from the right place. Doesn't mean, I mean, it's okay if they do it. Who am I to say that I'm just not going to sign that particular letter. I just don't think I don't think it represents my concerns in a way that's really genuine. Thank you for the questions. These are awesome. Okay. So let me keep this open and move to the side. So what else did I want to talk about? Okay, so these large language models. So to summarize, for those who might just be showing up, I think BABL is planning on engaging with these large language models a lot more in terms of research. So I wouldn't say BABL. This is probably more the Algorithmic Bias Lab, because unless somebody pays us to do that, it's going to be just sort of pure research side. So that stuff sits at the Algorithmic Bias Lab. But I think we're gathering resources right now to figure out how are we going to audit these in reasonable ways that do include socio-technical issues, but there's a lot of technical issues that are part of this that need to be understood more broadly. So speaking of actually technical issues, so another thing which I thought was, I'll bring people's attention to a couple of papers. Let me find this, which I thought were really interesting. And this is maybe only for the technical side, people who are kind of technically interested, but it does have relevance for risk as well. So let me share my screen for a second. My apologies to those who are maybe listening to this on the podcast, but I'm gonna share my screen here and showing a couple papers, which I think were pretty interesting, about in-context learning. And so let me close that. So in-context learning. So here's one, which is it's called the learnability of in-context learning. And this paper is, and then there's another one which is similar. Why can ChatGPT learn in context? Language models secretly perform gradient descent as meta optimizers. Let's not worry about the technical details, because I think most of you out there are not going to be super interested in this. But these two papers, and I can link these if people are interested in these. But the basic idea that they're trying to uncover is this idea of in-context learning. And so what is that? So if you look at these large language models, for the most part, the basic idea is that they are trained on a huge corpus of text. And so think like most of the internet. And their main goal is to predict the next word. I mean, or the next character, or it depends on how they're set up. But the main goal is to generate text from some prompt. And so you take a prompt, and then you are going to just generate text that would naturally follow from that prompt, given all of the data that you've seen in the past. So lots and lots of data. The models that are associated with that, the actual weights of the model. So think about it like a function that just predicts the next word or next character, depending on how it's built. And we'll just spit this out. Those weights don't change typically. I mean, there are some systems that could, but for the most part, they don't really change those weights. The model itself is kind of fixed. But it appears that these models can actually learn in context, meaning you give it a prompt and then you sort of have a conversation with it. It feeds that conversation back through the model to generate further responses. You're not actually changing the weights of the model. What you're doing is you're just setting up the context for it to, you're lengthening the length of that prompt, basically. And by basically prompt engineering and feeding it lots of examples of tasks that you might like it to do, even though it doesn't change the weights of the model, it learns from that process and can do new tasks from that process. So these two papers were just talking about the technical details of how that actually happens, that there is a sort of kind of quasi gradient descent, which is it's a way of training parameters, sort of a mathematical way of adjusting parameters for a model. That kind of happens in a meta way when you do this, when you feed these example tasks, these large language models. So why am I talking about this? Why is this relevant? It's because this is one of those things, and in fact, we're gonna be talking about this in our training courses, is understanding how these models actually work. And one of the key things that you have to understand, like when you're trying to audit a model, for instance, one of the key things you want to know, one of the many, is this model dynamic or is it static? So is this model fixed? And so that when I test this model, I can kind of trust that it's going to be behaving this way when it's deployed? Or is it dynamic, where it's changing and the model is going to evolve over time kind of dynamically? Or is it updated at some fixed cadence or something like that? And so, and the static models are much easier to deal with and much less risky from an audit perspective, because once you test it, and you have to look at a very wide parameter space that you're going to test the model, the technical testing of the model, and also some of the socio-technical stuff. And you can kind of trust that it's going to behave the same way, because the model's not dynamic, it's not changing. And this kind of, it's very clear that these large language models, while in theory they are fairly static, we can't count on the fact that they're static because of this meta learning, this in-context learning that happens. And so they can get capabilities, or they can learn things dynamically, even though they're fixed models. So that's a long way of saying it's an interesting technical issue that does bleed into the our understanding of how we need to test these things. And so that's why I'm reading these papers. I'm trying to understand what are the full capabilities of this in-context learning, and how far can it go? How much do we need to dig into this in-context learning when we do testing these systems, or when we do a risk assessment? How much can it change, and how does that affect like any controls you might put in place, any guardrails you might put in place? So that was those are two interesting papers that I'm going to enjoy finishing reading when I have time. Okay, what else was I going to talk about? I have a nice list here. So again, any questions, pop them in the chat. Okay, what else am I working on? Okay, the Digital Services Act. So I'm getting very excited about the Digital Services Act. It is approaching. And so the large platforms, so those of you who don't know the Digital Services Act, I think all of you do, but if you don't, it's the it's the EU regulation, which has been passed, and it's going to regulate these large online platforms. So in particular, the very large online platforms, VLOP, and the very large online search engines, that include things like Google and Bing, they are going to have special regulations associated with them, special obligations rather, and one of which is auditing, which I've talked about before, and I've participated in some consultation with the European Commission, putting my 2 cents in on behalf of BABL about what auditing should look like for these systems. And now I'm along with my team, it's not just me, we're digging into the Digital Services Act, the requirements for risk assessments, because and I'll share my screen again, Article 34 mandates risk assessments, and these risk assessments include all sorts of things, but they're really looking for potential violations of fundamental rights. And then further down, Article 35 talks about the mitigation of risks and what these platforms need to do to mitigate these risks. So BABL's been doing risk assessments for a long time, and we have certain methodology which we keep adapting and keep trying to improve. And what we're doing now is we're turning our sights onto these large platforms to try to think about what are our thoughts on these risk assessments, what kind of worries might we have, things that we might want to alert people to keep an eye out for. And so we're in the process of kind of developing risk assessment methodology and figuring out a way to test it sort of on a more empirical basis. And so looking through kind of things that other groups, civil society has done, independent researchers have done to identify potential problems in these platforms and in the algorithmic systems themselves, how they could potentially, things like filter bubbles, nudging, how content moderation could potentially cause problems. And so I'm excited about this work, and I think now that the platforms so the current state right now is these platforms have given their numbers to the European Commission. I think it's the Commission that's doing it. It's the European Commission, and the list is not out yet, as far as I know, of which platforms are officially designated as being these large, very large online platforms. But we can guess from the numbers that have been put out which ones are likely to, and it's all the usual suspects that you would expect to be these large platforms like Twitter and Instagram and Facebook and all of that. And once that published list is out, they're going to have basically, I think it's 4 months to get this stuff done. And so we want to get this done quickly so that we can try to help inform what this might look like. And I should say that right now, this is really apropos, because For Humanity, those of you who are in For Humanity or know about it, and if you're not in For Humanity, you should really join. For Humanity is working right now on audit criteria for compliance with the Digital Services Act. And they're going to present this very soon, actually, to the European Commission for their consideration. We'll see how much of that gets folded in to what the European Commission is which is on the delegated act on auditing. But in any case, this is really important stuff right now. And so we're trying to figure out at a practical level, what can we recommend for like the must-haves for these risk assessments based on our experience and based on the research that we're doing from other people's experience. Can we kind of hone in on a list of what we think is really the minimum you need for these, and then hopefully more, and then recommendations for like critical things that should be added on top of that. And then of course our research on on AI governance, which I talked about last week, is now out, and we're still working on it. But in terms of risk mitigation, we're also trying to figure out, can we operationalize some of these based on what we've learned in a way that's going to actually be helpful for the commission, and we'll see how that goes. But that's in our pipeline. It's something we're working on. If you're interested actually in this, or if you want to learn more, like, you can get involved in the For Humanity work pretty directly, and if you want to get like kind of get a sneak peek at what we're doing, we should be moving along pretty fast soon, and you can contact me. Okay, let me see. I felt like there might have been another question. Okay, so it's a question that says, just curious, why do we all focus on LLM that much? Like, for example, not on robotic process automation, because it's accessible to many, or technical maturity. Accessible by many. Okay, so the question is, why focusing on LLMs? It's a really good question. I think it's simply because it's accessible. I think that's mostly what it's exposure. Anybody can go in and actually interact with it. So a lot of people who have not been involved in this or super concerned about this field have all of a sudden had the opportunity to really interact with AI. And it's been shocking for them, because I think there was two camps. Either people thought the AI was like already at super genius level, and they just assumed that AI was out there and exists and at a really high level, and they just weren't reflective about it. Or they just they didn't think about AI at all, and they just didn't realize that it was even what was possible. And so things like Stable Diffusion and DALL-E and those sort of generative AI that would produce these images, that was kind of the first wave recently in the past year. And then everybody's all of a sudden, oh, wow, AI is crazy, it can do some crazy things. And then ChatGPT made it accessible for everybody. And so I think that's why we're talking about it. It's also, it does come with risks. It's not the fact that it is accessible to everybody is part of the reason why it's risky. And it's accessible to everybody with very few guardrails. I think ChatGPT has plenty of guardrails. The team at Bing have tried to put guardrails. The Google team, I'm sure, is working on similar things. But in general, there's very few restrictions on what it can do and what you can ask it to do. And so I think that's the only, I think you're right. There are so many other issues out there that are, old-fashioned sort of automated decision tools are still out there, and they're proliferating, and they're being used in more and more places. And I have a serious worry that we're going to get distracted from the fact that a lot of consequential decisions are getting made about people's lives using AI, which is untested, and with no oversight or very little oversight. And we're going to start forgetting about that and focusing on these large language models too much. And so that's a bit of a worry. I think you're right about that. Other thing is NIST risk management framework. So one thing that was cool is that the NIST risk management framework is everybody knew it was going to be influential, but it's already starting to influence laws. And I posted on LinkedIn about this, and I don't know if people saw it, but there is a California, a recently proposed California law, or maybe it's a bill. Let me see if I can find it. And what was interesting is that, here it is. What was interesting that I noticed is that it pretty directly uses, let me share my screen. So here's the bill. This is a fairly recent bill. I don't know what it's called, but I feel like it goes by its name. where is it? Yeah, number 331. Let's just call it that. Assembly Bill number 331. This is in California. But it's about automated decision tools. So I was just saying that I'm kind of worried that automated decision tools people are going to forget about them. Luckily, not everybody's forgetting about them. So what's interesting about this is that this law, firstly, the thing I'm excited about it is it calls for impact assessments, and the impact assessments will cover a lot of the things that I care about, including testing for adverse impact. And I don't think they use the term necessarily socio-technical, but they do. I think they do hint at it, and so these impact assessments are going to be required. But the thing that is interesting, let me do map. Let's see if that. Yeah, here we go. One of the requirements here is, let me see what this is. Safeguards required by the subdivision shall be appropriate to all of the following: technical feasibility and cost of available tools, and then deployer or developer to map, measure, manage, and govern the risks associated with the automated decision tools. And so those of you who know the NIST risk management framework, this is right out of the NIST risk management framework. And so I thought that was really cool. It's clearly affecting policy already. And just like the cybersecurity standard that NIST came out with, it's likely to be sort of de facto required in some situations. So I wouldn't be surprised if in a couple years, large enterprise companies who are procuring AI tools from vendors will require that those vendors have some sort of attestation or provide some documentation against the NIST AI risk management framework. So I think it's going to be influential. And actually, speaking of, along those lines, one of the things that we're working on is trying to come up with some resources for people to make it easier for them to implement various frameworks, including this NIST risk management framework. So those of you available who are familiar with Notion, for instance, this is something I was just working on this morning, taking the NIST risk management framework, taking their govern, manage, map, and measure. I think the manage and map should be in the other direction, but that's fine. And so they have a bunch of, they're not criteria, they're just categories. Legal and regulatory requirements involving AI are understood, managed, and documented. And so what we're putting together is some very simple tools that people could just use as a template if they wanted to do that. And for instance, I can go ahead and make Ben responsible for that. Status is in progress. We can upload some documents and that sort of thing. And so I think this sort of, now of course there are real tools out there, like there are companies like Credo AI, Truera, Mission Control, Fairly AI, and a number of other ones I'm forgetting, that their whole business model is to do this sort of work, these sort of governance workflows, and tying them into testing. Our interest in this is for those companies that can't afford that stuff. We want to just give out some stuff for free that makes it easy for companies to engage with some of these best practices, laws, regulations, and requirements for those. Another example here is our automated decision tool audit. So automated decision tools, so they could be automated employment decision tools, which are the ones that we're auditing now, but in general, automated decision tools like the California law is talking about. You want to quantify bias, you want to have governance, you want to do a risk assessment. And so we're putting our our criteria for that in these sorts of formats, just to make it a little bit easier for clients to deal with that. So that's along those lines, what we're doing for the NIST risk management framework. But I just wanted to mention this NIST risk management framework because it is it's already becoming pretty influential, which is exciting that you know, there's a lot of progress in that. It's affecting policy. Okay, all right, time is flying. All right, let me see. I think that's all I have. So I have no updates. Well, last update I'll have is the auditor training. The first few people have already started to enroll in those courses. So I think that's a good sign that people are actually interested in this. And so we're pushing ahead, and you know, the official date to actually release this is now set. It's going to be May 8th. And so our team is going to be busy between now and May 8th, actually trying to put these together. And so, you know, we're pretty much done the capability mapping phase, where we want to mapping out what capabilities we want to us to teach for and assess. And now we need to get sort of deeper into the curriculum and making sure that we have a good pedagogy, a good response, a plan for actually transferring some of these skills. And so that's exciting. So there'll be more, and I haven't launched this officially. I haven't sort of made any kind of big announcements on LinkedIn or in the mailing list to officially launch this yet, but it's pretty clear, since people have already started to register for it, that there is some interest. And so we're gonna push ahead, and I'll have a more formal announcement about that soon. Let me see. I see another question popping up. Okay, good question. What is the difference between your course and the courses offered by For Humanity? Okay, they're quite different. So For Humanity's courses are specific to, not all of them, but they have two different kinds of courses. One is very specific for a certification scheme, and so for those kind of courses, that you can become a For Humanities certified auditor for that certification scheme. So EU AI Act is the one that's happening right now. They had one for New York City. And so if you want to use their criteria to audit companies for the EU AI Act, you would take that certification scheme. They have some other more what they call expert courses, where things like risk management framework and algorithm ethics. Those are more subject matter courses, which will teach you about the subject matter of algorithm ethics and that sort of thing. These courses that we are doing are different. They're closer to the second ones, these expert ones, but they're subject matter courses. And so 4 out of the 5 are straight up subject matter courses. So that means we teach you about AI in one of them, like what are the tools used by AI, machine learning engineers, what are the different kind of models, how do you understand them in the context of the auditing and risk. And then we have risk and impact assessments, which is teaching how to do risk and impact assessments. And we're biased because it's basically going to be our methodology, but we incorporate, it's a very generic kind of standard methodology. And then we have technical testing, and there's AI governance and risk management. These are all practical subject matter, teaching people how to do responsible AI in organizations for the purposes of auditing those organizations for doing it. So our main goal is to train auditors to actually be able to audit these systems. The 5th course is very specific to auditing, where it's the standards and methodologies that we use to audit. And we'll actually be doing case studies where we review documentation, talk about how do you interview, how do you do claims verification, what are the auditing procedures. This is like all of them are very practical, and they're based on case studies, what we do as auditors. And so it's less high level than the 4Humanity courses. It's much more practical. I mean, the 4Humanity courses are great, and I think those, in fact, we require, if we have auditors that are going to audit one of the 4Humanity certification schemes, they have to take those courses in order to get certified through 4Humanity. But these are just practical AI auditing skills that you could take kind of anywhere. So anyway, I hope that answers your question. That's and there'll be more. I'll talk more about this when I do a kind of an official launch, and there's an FAQ on the webpage. So let me share. I got 2 minutes left. Let me share my screen yet again, and I think I have here. So this is, let me close this. Starts May 8th. So here we have frequently asked questions. And so I'm going to keep adding to those. And so if you have questions, any of you out there who are interested in these questions, in understanding more about this, and you have questions, I can put them in the frequently asked questions. So how many courses? There are 5. What if I just want to take one? You can just take one. You don't have to do the whole thing. The plan is to make these really focused. Like I don't want people to take a huge amount of time on them. We were going to be really concentrate and distill down exactly what we're looking for. And so it's like 2 weeks long, about 30 hours per course total effort. That's the goal. We'll see if we get there, but I think that's manageable. It will be intense in the sense that some of the stuff is not easy. And so it's 30 hours, but it's really means 30 very dedicated hours. Yeah, then there's a bunch of things about prerequisites, what we kind of would expect. Can your employer pay for this? I got a question recently about whether this is useful for EU clients. And so our response is that, yeah, we are tailoring this to be as applicable to both US and EU organizations. And in fact, we're pretty heavily involved in understanding how these EU regulations, the digital package and Digital Services Act and the EU AI Act, how those are going to get enforced, what those requirements are. And so that's being folded into what we're doing. So if you're in a European firm that plans on doing auditing or conformity assessments for the EU AI Act or the Digital Services Act, then all of this stuff will apply. What if you don't want to be an AI auditor? Is it going to be useful? The answer is absolutely yes, because these are all the same skills that if you go to All Tech is Human job board and look at the job postings that are there for responsible AI in organizations, these are all the things basically that they're looking for anyway. We just are using them in the context of auditing because we have to audit those companies against that, but it's all the same skills, and we're teaching you those skills so that you can recognize how to audit companies for that. Okay, thank you so much, everybody. I don't think there's any other questions. Thank you so much for showing up. Really appreciate it. If you're listening to this, if you're watching this on YouTube, please like and subscribe. If you're listening to this on a podcast, thank you so much for listening. I'll see everybody next week on Lunchtime Babbling.